We've been sold a loud, abrasive version of discipline. The 5 a.m. alarm clock utilized as a blunt force instrument against your natural circadian rhythm. Content creators performing ice baths for an audience. Yet look at their faces. That isn't true grit. It's a dopaminergic debt they're struggling with behind the eyes. It's performative resilience. Listen closely, because this is where the Australian hard yaka ethos misses the mark. You aren't lazy. You are suffering from a systemic collapse of your internal maw, the sacred space between your efforts. Your prefrontal cortex is being hijacked by 1,000 digital microaggressions. It's a relentless cognitive taxing of your executive function that leaves your focus shattered across the pavement. When your nervous system is permanently redlined, you reach a state of neural fatigue that a standard snooze won't touch. You are metabolizing stress instead of realigning your biological clock. And somewhere between the blue light glare and the jittery caffeine spike, we fractured our ma, that essential rhythmic space where the soul actually breathes. By prioritizing digital dopamine over deep stillness, your prefrontal cortex entered a state of chronic hyperarousal. You haven't lost your drive, you've simply decentralized your focus. This isn't a lack of hard yaka. You're not weak, you're just suffering from extreme neurofatigue because you've been running your internal battery on empty for a decade. Because modern life, especially the relentless grind of the Sydney CBD, has conditioned your amygdala to survive noise, bypassing the wisdom of the pause. We've become experts at processing raw data, but we've forgotten how to synthesize meaning. Your brain is a library in a cyclone, unable to find the shelf. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, millions of Japanese students aren't just pushing through, they are architecting their own neural pathways with a precision we often lack in the Sydney hustle. They spend years memorizing over 2,000 kanji characters, a level of information density that would cause most Westerners a complete cognitive blackout. Not temporarily, not for a quick win or a seasonal exam. This is a commitment to lifelong cognitive mastery, far beyond the hard yaka of a typical 9 to 5. Thousands of symbols, multiple contextual meanings, perfect recall under immense pressure. They aren't just organizing data, they're integrating it into their biological rhythm. And strangely, their secret has almost nothing to do with studying harder or sacrificing their nervous system. It's about the ma, the space between the effort. Because in the dojo of the mind, discipline isn't a punitive strike. It's not about the lash, it's about the alignment. In Japan, discipline was never designed as a soul-crushing slog. It became a cadence, a metronomic pulse that synchronizes your neural pathways with the natural flow of time, rather than fighting against it. This is the architectural stillness. Every sweep of the broom, every stroke of the brush, it's not hard yaka for the sake of it. It's the strategic curation of spatial awareness and timing. Yet, back in the high-octane grind of a Sydney CBD skyscraper or a frantic university library, we've distorted the very architecture of cognitive growth. The average Aussie thinks cognitive retention is a product of brute force intensity. We try to bash information into our skulls like we're hammering a rusted fence post into sun-baked earth. But your neurocircuitry doesn't trust intensity. It treats the all-nighter as a biological trauma, a chaotic spike that disrupts your synaptic architecture. It trusts the rhythmic pulse, the ma of neuroplasticity. Consistency is the primary signal for long-term synaptic reinforcement, the ripple, not the flood. You're starting your hard yaka from a massive neurological deficit. Most people begin the day already behind, fighting the clock like it's a mortal enemy. Phone in hand before the first ray of sunlight. Notifications hijacking your dopamine pathways before you've even organized a coherent thought. You're outsourcing your focus to the algorithm. Caffeine before hydration. Pure cortisol before consciousness. You aren't lazy, mate. You're just mismanaging your biological rhythm until you're running on empty. Your autonomic system isn't transitioning. It's being jump-started like a dead battery in an old Kingswood. You aren't waking up, you're being physiologically hijacked by a cortisol spike before your feet even hit the floor. Then we wonder why nothing sticks. You're hammering at the screen, but your neural plasticity is at zero. Cognitive saturation has set in because you've bypassed the ma, the space between thoughts, leaving your prefrontal cortex absolutely buggered. Contrast this with the Shokunin mindset found across the sea. In Japan, the morning isn't a race to a finish line that doesn't exist. It's a ritual of spatial awareness. They don't fight the friction of the day, they synchronize with it. This isn't about urgency, it's about kinetic intentionality. Every item placed in the bag is a micro-meditation, a way of organizing the external to stabilize the internal. It's the deliberate antithesis of our frantic Australian scramble, a solitary walk under the silver frost of a Melbourne dawn. No podcasts, no noise, just the rhythmic pulse of the ma. This is where the brain reorganizes itself, transforming the previous day's data into actual wisdom. Before you engage with the digital noise, you must open the physical frame. This isn't just stretching, it is an invitation to your proprioceptive system to inhabit the space, the ma, before the day demands its tax. The frantic hard yaka of a Sydney rush hour ignores a fundamental biological truth. Neural plasticization prioritizes consistent pattern over sheer, brute force effort. Your brain isn't looking for the struggle, it's looking for the rhythm. Photons hitting the retina at this hour do more than reveal the world. They signal the suprachiasmatic nucleus to cease the melatonin drip. You aren't just waking up, you're realigning your biological clock for precision focus. Think of a slow walk through a Melbourne laneway. You aren't sprinting, you're navigating. Moving gently ensures blood flow enters the prefrontal cortex as a tide, not a flash flood that triggers a cortisol spike. And then we arrive at the void. We call it emptying the vessel. It is the one discipline Western students almost never practice because they are too busy being productive to actually be effective. In the maw of a quiet Melbourne dawn, before the chaos of the M1, we look back. Japanese masters don't just stack new data, they recalibrate by retrieving yesterday's foundations. It's not about the grind, it's about the echo. Ditch the highlighters. That's just colorful procrastination. Pushing ink around a page isn't hard yaka, it's a cognitive mirage. We want raw retrieval, the blank page where your synapses actually have to sweat. You're not just remembering, you're executing a neurosearch, forcing the prefrontal cortex to scavenge for that lost data. This friction, that's where the quiet discipline of the mind actually manifests. Most of us are just digital tourists, staring at screens in a trance. But consuming isn't colonizing your mind. You can't watch your way to a resilient neuroarchitecture. It's passive, and it's why you're drained. Strength isn't built in the intake, it's forged in the recovery. Every time you pull a memory from the void, you're thickening the myelin sheath. That's the uncomfortable truth of the quiet discipline. Mindlessly scrolling those grind set reels feels like progress, but it's just dopaminergic wallpaper. You're confusing visual consumption with cognitive growth. Scanning the same paragraph 5 times is a suburban treadmill. You're clocking the kilometers, but you're still parked in the same driveway. Here is the neurological bottleneck. Recognition is not memory. It's an illusion of fluency that robs you of your grit. The synapses fire when they're forced to hunt. The brain prioritizes what it struggles to retrieve, not what it casually grazes like cattle. This is the maw of the mind. By organizing the friction, study ceases to be a chaotic brawl. It becomes a quiet, stoic discipline, pure, hard yaka without the noise. There is a profound neurological gravity in the maw, the purposeful space between actions. Look at this pour. No rush, just precision. In a world of Melbourne rain and gray commutes, your desk must be a calibrated environment for cognitive endurance, not a landing pad for chaos. One intentional breath. That's the trigger. You aren't just inhaling, you are signaling your prefrontal cortex to exit the always-on sympathetic state. These tiny rituals are the architecture of elite discipline telling the brain, this matters. By 3 p.m., the hard yaka myth usually backfires. Across Sydney offices, we see the same cognitive collapse. The brain isn't being lazy, it is thermally overloaded. You have exhausted your neurotransmitter reserves because you refuse to respect the friction of learning. The typical Aussie response? Push through. More caffeine, 50 open tabs, and a frantic sense of panic. You're redlining your neural circuits until they seize. This isn't grit, it's performance theater that leads to systemic burnout. Compare that to the rhythm of the quiet discipline. It's a 4-0-minute deep work sprint followed by 10 minutes of total neurological decompression. You aren't avoiding work, you're facilitating synaptic plasticity. You're giving the brain the space it needs to actually build. Attention isn't a flat line, it's a tide. Your neural circuits weren't engineered for a 6-hour siege. You're redlining your prefrontal cortex until it smokes. In that Melbourne drizzle, staring out the train window, that's where the ma happens. Your subconscious is synthesizing data while you're simply being. The gap is the work. We've weaponized noise to avoid ourselves. Modern life has choked out our cognitive breathing room. People are terrified of a silent commute because they're terrified of their own depletion. True discipline isn't a marathon. It's spaced repetition. It's the strategic return to the task after the ma has allowed for neural consolidation. It isn't glamorous. It won't trend on social media. It's just ordinary, rhythmic resilience. But this boring consistency is what separates the masters from the burnt out. Cognitive endurance isn't about grit. It's about metabolic stability. We ditch the heavy pub parma for lighter fuel to bypass the postprandial dip. Your focus is a biological output, not a motivational choice. Optimizing your insulin response is the first step to sustained high performance. True resilience isn't a Sydney scream, it's a Melbourne rain. It's that stoic commuter on the Flinders Street line, rain drumming on the glass, showing up without the fanfare. That rhythmic consistency is where the neural pathways for grit are actually forged in the quiet gray of the everyday. Sleep is the ultimate sanitizer for your synaptic pathways. A single review before the lights go out signals to your hippocampus that this data is vital. You aren't merely memorizing, you're encoding your future identity while your conscious mind rests. This is the ma of the circadian rhythm. We often mistake ma for emptiness, but it's actually the structural integrity of the pause. Without the gap between the notes, you don't have music, you just have noise. This quiet discipline is the negative space that allows your hard yakka to actually mean something. Forget the grand, loud breakthroughs. You don't need a miracle, you need a beat. Small, rhythmic repetitions consistently applied will eventually transmute into your very identity. Success isn't a roar, it's the quietest thing you'll ever do. Stay rhythmic.